Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight's program. I'm Young Park. I'm an Other Services Librarian at the Chicago Public Library. Tonight's program is a part of the 2021 One Book, One Chicago season. This year marks the 20th season of the One Book, One Chicago, a citywide book club that brings residents together over a common book and theme. The 2021 One Book, One Chicago selection by the Chicago Public Library is Bedrock Faith by Eric Charles May. Bedrock Faith tells the story of a Chicago neighborhood that will be familiar to many of us and emphasizes the need for neighborhoods to come together to support each other. Please visit onebookonechicago.org to join 2021 One Book, One Chicago discussions, events, and programs. Tonight, we are so pleased to welcome Jin Lee to this program, Korean American in Chicago. Mr. Jin Lee is the president of JLEE Associated, a consulting firm specializing in government and nonprofit organizations, and the current elected school board member of Maine Township High School District 207. Mr. Lee will give us a lecture on Korean American in Chicago, how their community formed, what they did for a living, and how they keep their cultural heritage, and where they have been moving. The audience can post their questions to Jin Lee. Please type your questions in the chat box, which is located to the right side of your screen. Mr. Lee will post the answers after the program. Thank you to the CPL Foundation and other supporters for making this season of One Book, One Chicago possible. Also, this program is co-sponsored by CPL's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Committee, and thanks to them for making tonight's program possible. Please join me in welcoming Jin Lee to the CPL virtual stage. Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Young Park. First of all, I'm grateful that I was able to receive an invitation from the CPL Foundations and then Library Foundation for this very important session. And I'm so pleased, delightfully able to join you to share the history of Korean American community in perspective. But I think the library is doing a fantastic job. Very educational, and hoping that through this kind of share the experience of community histories that people, the community can be more respectably learn more about the other community, and also respectably we can all work together. So again, thank you so much very much for the invitation.
Thank you. So the first question to you is that could you give us a picture of the first Korean American community in Chicago, and where have the Koreans been moved?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the Chicago community is quite unique. We are the third largest city in nationwide, next to California and New York. So Chicago ranked third largest city, as well as the ethnic community involvement and also residence-wise. So Chicago Korean American community kind of had a long historical experience. Maybe we can go all the way back to 1883 when Chicago had the museum exhibition at that time, and Korea was, even though it was kind of last minute, but were invited to, and they were able to participate. So that's I guess we can start it. And then along that line, early 1900, of course, a lot of 유학생 educators from Korea that were able to came to study and learning about the U.S. education system and so on. So even though very small number population were slowly coming into Chicago surrounding area. So as we all know, in early 1903, of course, nice and size 103 members of Korean immigrants came to Honolulu, Hawaii, settled, and then some of them were able to move to California and then move to kind of like a Chicago Midwest area as well. And along with that line, as I mentioned, the educators, students who want to study more, they came also. And then like 50s after the Korean War, we do see the many Koreans were married to Korean War veterans, and then they partially immigrate to Midwest, including city of Chicago area. And then after 1964-5, that the new Immigration Act opens, we have some more larger members were able to, family members, and were able to immigrate to United States, and also along with study, and also workman visa as well. I do see that in the beginning, many like nurses, participants, laborers came from German. Surprisingly and interestingly, they came to immigrate to the United States, to mainland, and then they came to Chicago as well. So along that line, we can safely presume that around 1960s, 65 after, we are beginning to see a small growth of members. And those students were able to establish the community and organize a like Korean American Association of Chicago, which is currently a like umbrella organization, organized in 1962, so something like that. And then even further, 1930, late 1930, one of the Korean church right here was also started with one of the charter members, so-called from the Korean American community as well. So it all brings all into Chicago area, surrounding area, and then the population steadily grow. So we are seeing a very nice population steady growth, and I could say more of the 1970s and 80s, 90s, and so on. Myself personally, my parents immigrated in 1975, February 15. That I do still recall. So what at the departing at the Gimpo Airport, farewell to our cousins and other family members, and we thought that will be forever that we cannot able to see each other. So and at the young teenager age, we were I think we took the Northwest airline and arrived, stopping by at the Japan Narita Airport. And then from there, we had a flight to Northwestern flight to Honolulu, Hawaii. And very interestingly, and I think at that time in early 70s, who may be stopping to different port of entry, like in Hawaii, for example, my parents and myself, including our family members, received a immigration card at the airport. So that's quite interesting. So we were able to receive that. And then from Honolulu, Hawaii, we took the flight to Houston, Texas. And then from there, a 2-hour drive to a so-called Galveston, Texas, a small, tiny tourist area. That's where our family members kind of immigrate as a work visa. So my mother got as a work visa from working at the restaurant as a assistant cook. And then my father got a job it's called a Kroger. It's like a big, huge grocery store, still there in Texas. And he was as a bag preparer or as a kind of job, first job. That I do recall. So in 70s, we had a nice members came in Chicago. At the time, maybe 5,000 to about 10,000 Korean Americans members slow resided in Chicago area. And that's how we could say that it started grow and settling down in Chicago area at the time that I'm able to share.
So could you tell us what part of Chicago they settled down at the first? North side or south side, west side, what side of the Chicago?
Sure. So at that time, because of any early Korean, now actually the Korean Americans who's coming in nowadays compared to 70s, 80s and so on, there is a huge difference between the original, the old members like my parents and so on. At that time, the Korean government has a restriction on how much you can bring the dollar, US dollar, into United States. From what I knew, maybe 2,000 to up to like 3,000. But many members, when I talk to that early immigrants, they can only bring less than $1,000 or so. My parents, when they immigrated in 75, they could only bring $600 US dollars at the time. So we are like survive with bare hand pretty much, and parents really have to sacrifice their lives and work more than 15, 20 hours almost to put a bread and butter on the table. That's how we had an early immigration hardship. Now the new Korean American immigrants is far different per se. Now, when they sell, generally speaking, when they sell the houses or apartment in Korea, it's like more than I heard like almost $1 million or something. So when they sell the houses with that cash, and then no restriction on financial, that restriction from the Korean government, they can bring all that money in cash and they can buy the house, the car, and living in a nice, comfortable community per se. But in going back to early times in 70s, at the time, so many Korean Americans, newly arrivals, because they didn't have the money and they have to start off from bare hand. So what they need is they need to find a place where very affordable apartments. Second, the local transportation public transportation have to be really good. So a lot of buses, trains, and so on. So that have to be easy access for them to work, get a job and commute and so on. So those are the kind of main things. So based on that, when we see it in early, I see at the time, people were Koreans were immigrated to like a Lakeview area, included surrounding on Belmont and Ashland area, Clark and Belmont, somewhere down there. So they kind of established the surrounding. And then slowly, like 80s, we do see that people, when they also own and run and operating the businesses in so-called right now Korean community, which is in Albany Park, which Albany Park Library is there. So that community, it has a very accessible on apartment housing, because at that time, I do recall, maybe like a 3-bedroom was on about $600, $700 or so. And we have a very decent public transportation, Pulaski bus, Lawrence bus, Kimball bus, and then we got a Brown line, and then easy access to 90-94 highway in surrounding. So the people could able to come together, and if they need to go to a work, which at that time, many of them were working in many factories. So that the surrounding became very popular and accessible for the immigrant Asian American minority which including Korean American community, were able to settle, so that parents were able to send the kids to, at that time, Roosevelt High School, and then San High School, Lakeview High School, Lane Tech High School, and then
Amundsen, maybe?
Amundsen too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then mothers, yeah.
Bethel High School,
yeah.
and so on. So that was at that
see.
time, our teenager high school Korean community hangouts as well. And then we go to Lawrence Avenue, went to a Korean restaurant there, like jjajangmyeon, which is very popular at the time. Some of them was only $2.99, and so on. So it was very affordable. And then the reason, as I mentioned, for that job related, Koreans did work for many manufacturing companies in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, actually, that would be my second question. Can you also share? Yeah, can you also share the Korean American business sector in Chicago? So, what did the Korean Americans do for living? Then, are there any big changes over time? So if yes, why has it been changes?
Okay. Yeah. So as a Korean Americans, immigrants, when they arrive here, actually it's kind of somewhat, we could say, unique community compared to other Asian community, like, for say, Indian Pakistan community or Filipino community, because their second language is accessible to English. But Koreans were not at all, like Chinese and Japanese at the time, and so on. So even though the Koreans receive a higher education in their motherland country, when they come here, that is totally, I would say, unusual in a way. So because of the language hardship, because of the cultural differences, early Korean immigrants really had a hardship in many perspective area. So when they come, they know that as a person in charge, person in charge, they gotta put the the bread and butter, Korean food on the table. So they really have to sacrifice. But in order to do that, they really gotta find a job. But at that time, they really cannot find a job in so-called white-collar job, government jobs at all because of the language barrier. Even though the immigrants had a good qualified educational degree and so on, but when you do an interview and so at the time, they are pretty much got rejected because of not able to communicate. So when they look at those factory at the time, economics in United States in 70s, 80s were booming. And at the time, the manufacturing industry was very busy. And when they see hiring a Korean Americans as a assembler or the laborer or so-called inspection part departments, they see that Koreans are very hardworking, diligent people. They don't talk too much either. And then while they're sitting on that position, doing all that manufacturing products, doing all that inspections, their inspectors, their supervisor were very pleased and want to continue hire Korean Americans. So that at the time, the people who their friends, Korean Americans, they say, hey, come to my XYZ manufacturing factories. And when they recommended, the boss, the supervisor trusts them, and then they were able to find an easy job, regardless of language barrier and cultural differences. So they've been working there a lot. I do still recall when I was in high school, summertime, I was able to work one of the, it's called the Bodine Electronic Manufacturing Company in kind of Edison Park area. Edison and Western nearby Lane Tech. But so I was able to work there for few sessions and able to earn some money. So that was quite a experiences for me. So many Koreans were able to work in a manufacturing job and so on. But as we all know, it is a quite challenge for Korean bread earners to put the right food on the table, having families get together and try to send them to the better educational schools. So then they have to move to suburb and so on, and which is very expensive. And when you're living in an apartment, $500-600 a month, it was a quite challenge. So therefore, they have to think behind the boxes. What could they do? So believe it or not, when you see a Korean American immigrants, a lot of other ethnic immigrants or mainstream sees that, oh, they are like entrepreneurs. They have a great mind, the thoughts, are very ideal on the business on matters and so on. But surprisingly, when they start as a Korean Americans, they were not really entrepreneurs at all. So at that time, while they're working, they really need to find some other better financial access opportunity. That's where they look into the eyes of a business per se. But as we may know, that many Koreans start off with one individual, small, tiny retail mom and pop stores. Now, when you're looking at some other Asian community, other ethnic community, we are seeing, let's say, Indian Pakistan community who owns a gas station shop, Dunkin' Donuts, the bigger ones. Chinese American community, including Chinatown and others, but big Chinese, the restaurants. But you'd be surprised that I heard, we know that many Chinese community organizations put the financial together to help assist new Chinese arrival, support financially, open their businesses, and able to conduct and operate it. But at that time, Koreans were not that situation. Barely we have to make our own money, and with that savings, we gotta open that business. But gratefully, on that 70s, 80s, in Korea government, that time, the OEM business were very successful. The United States manufacturers, they make the products in Korea, like general merchandise items, bags, accessories, earrings, rings, or T-shirts, including the wigs, beauty supply products, and many other things. Were able to, and the Korean immigrants happen to have a little better or much accessibility to purchase those products from Korea directly, so they can buy in, bring it into US, California, New York, Chicago, and then they were able to open their small mom and pop businesses in certain blue collar area, Hispanic community, or Black American communities, and so on, including a lot of free markets. They were able to, so even the 유학생, the Korean students who came to study, so during the daytime, they go to schools, and then weekend, they buy those products, go to free market, and they were able to earn the financial access, paid up the tuitions and so on. But eventually, that business grew bigger and bigger. Many of them, surprisingly, the people who immigrated 40 years or so ago, they sometimes not able to graduate fully, and then they turn their career to this business venture. And then we see so many people in what do you call wholesale businesses, importer businesses, in the wig, hair good accessory industries, the general merchandise industries, the beauty supply industry, the clothing industries. They are all over. and they become very successful. So they were able to purchase, invested in real estate, send their kids to better school, better housings, by purchasing, good, nice, expensive cars, and living a very dependent, so-called luxury life at that time. So that's how the Korean American become an entrepreneur. But of course, we can share that, of course, talk a little later too, how it changed. Now it has slowly changing to a totally different perspective on Korean American business per se. But now, as many first generation Korean immigrants who are still involving with the business industries, along with, as I mentioned, a few industry plus like dry cleaning industries, also one of the biggest, along with others. And they've been really work hard, but also the businesses with the various reasons, including the COVID, the business is really downsizing it. And I see that sadly, the many are right now in retirement ages. They're like almost 70s and of course 80s. So they're folding their businesses as well, so that the new second, third generation of Korean American generation children who sometimes they wish to take over, but which they do not. So that's also big changes in our Korean American community that I can share with.
Thank you. Then what does the second generation and the third generation of the Korean American do?
So second generation, of course, they are really not having any cultural differences and or financial hardship as their parents, first generation Korean Americans immigrate to the United States in general. So they understand the culture, so they don't really have a problem going to school and experiencing the American culture life, because they are a so-called American inside already. For the, let's say, so-called, I don't know if the audience may have heard like 1.5 generation, second generation, third generation, but it's kind of unique. I think the Asian community may be the only one who may use that terminology in a way. But for me, in a way, I consider myself as a 1.5 generation because I came here in teenage years. So something like that when you're teens and so on. So at the time, you have a challenge. When I went to middle school in the United States in Galveston, Texas, because of the huge language barrier, I had a great stresses. And having that's a totally different story too, but had a lot of stresses, a lot of challenges and so on. And it was quite a difficulty overcoming such too. And then, so the second generation means like my kids. Right now, I have two children, Jenna and Andrew. Jenna, she's a school teacher, math teacher, 7th grade in Bensonville. My son Andrew worked at the chemical research lab called Aviv. So again, they're into like a professionalism and such. So we are seeing a huge differences between our the second generation, and furthermore, they became a more of becoming professionals and working for the white collar industries, companies, and so on. But 1.5 generation and the first immigrant generation, of course, is totally different. And then we are closely kind of like communicating with or involving with the Korean American community, including, in surrounding Asian American community as well. So basically what I'm saying is the second generation of Korean Americans right now is in different stresses, of course, but they are in far better financial, the cultural level that they are living in, and they should be really grateful and never forget about their parents and their grandparents when they immigrate to the United States, and how hard really they sacrifice their lives and how hard they really work. Because of them, they are here.
Thank you. Okay, how do Korean Americans keep their cultural heritage? Did they put an effort to share the Korean heritage with non-Korean Americans?
So yes, it's a very important as relate to what we just shared, the second generation Korean Americans and so on. The sharing a Korean, their own ethnic motherland, the heritage is, I have to say, is very critically important. And not only a Korean American community, but any other ethnic community as well. When we are immigrate to United States, as we all know, this United States is most definitely opportunity for better living and better opportunity for the immigrants. People from Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin, South America, and so on, they are coming together and living in a one, as a whole space, so-called we call melting pot or salad bowl, and so on. But as we all know, when we are into this melting pot, we don't have that identity. We don't have that tradition, culture, and so on. It's really difficult to cultivate that unless your parents or your grandparents are able to cultivate that and continue provide that to the younger generation. If the general other ethnic immigrant community who may not able to do that well, eventually they're going to lose huge on their cultural perspective, identity, and this cultural perspective as well. So thankfully for the Korean American community, we believe strongly in this identity and the cherishing the cultural background as well, because we have a couple thousand years of Korean histories in background. So when we came to immigrate, of course, it may be difficult to teach them, but I think we were one of the first actioner to create a Korean language school per se in various churches. At that time in 70s, by the way, 70s and so on, when newly arrived Koreans, we need someone for the dependency. We gotta find an apartment, we gotta buy the car, we gotta send the kids to school, but we do not know how. And it's very complicated complication with the knowing the American culture, school education culture, and getting a job too, interviewing. Those are having many difficulty. So guess what? The Korean church, the pastors, doing a great job as a pastor, but also at the same time as a social worker, even though they don't have a proper license. So it's interestingly, you've been hearing this a lot in people who immigrated in that early 70s. When they come, first thing is that you kind of go to churches nearby. Then your pastor take you to a finding housing in an apartment nearby, and then take your kids to a school for registration, and even sometimes finding a job in various manufacturing factories in surrounding everything. So you'd be surprised in a way in early days, you see a lot of Korean immigrants are very religiously attending various churches and Catholics too. and you are seeing many churches in our surrounding than probably many other ethnic community per se. So that was somewhat. But through the Korean community leadership, churches, language schools, various organizations, we would like to continuously partnership with the young professional second, third Korean American generations and having their kids to come on board, and we could able to teach them continuously history about the Korean culture, history about the Korean identity. So when they became leaders in our Maine society, working in a professional industries and so on, they will never forget about their ancestry. So we hope to continuously able to see that. It's a big challenge, but yes, our current generation, the members, including like yourself, Ms. Young Park, myself, including anybody else, will continue to put our effort to have a better, building a better identity and cultural understanding about the grandparents' motherland. So we hope to do that.
Thank you. Do we have a Koreatown in Chicago now?
So yes, and still we could say yes,
okay.
in a way.
Okay. Then did we have the Koreatown in Chicago?
So yes, we officially we could say we do.
Then what happened in the Koreatown in Chicago in past decades?
Okay, so from 60s, 70s, and 80s, like in New York, California, New York, and so on, all the big cities, when Koreans immigrate to build, settle the nest businesses and so on, of course, you were able to establish the local spaces, and then you consider Chinatown, Italy town, a Polish community, and so on, right? So yes, in Korean community too, we do have it in, especially in Chicago area. So when they settle 70s, 80s, the nice good numbers are coming in. And at that time, I do recall that was the 70s, as you mentioned too. At the time, Korean leadership communities were trying to settle in where in town they should settle in as a Korean town. It's unofficial, but at that time, some members were recommending actually where right now is an Indian-Pakistan community, which is a Devon and Western, that area. That was also one of the potential location area that Korean community think this might be a good area to settle in and so on. But regardless, they kind of settled in Lakeview community, and then officially kind of settled in Albany Park community. So officially they are considered as a Korean community, because nationwide, we, City of Chicago, Chicago Korean community uniquely have a so-called Soul Drive.
Yes.
Honorary Soul Drive sign, the panel posted in Lawrence Avenue, that's 4800 North, that's Lawrence Avenue, in between Cassie Avenue up to Pulaski, at least. That's more than 10 blocks, huge block. Because of the Korean immigrant sacrifice, and they, at the time, they became, one time, it kind of became a so-called a ghost town per se, and a lot of people, there was like a Jewish community, they moved out to local suburban area, like at the time Skokie, Niles, and further northwest side. So the Koreans came in and they settled in along with they purchased the property as well. So I believe that's 1993. I think it can be early at the Kimball, the Brown Line Station, front of inviting the aldermen at the time with the Korean community leaders. They do the resolution and recognition of a Seoul Drive. So we did that. So the sign's still there, but of course now after based on census too, after 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, and now 2020 census too, based on, we still could say city of Chicago area, more than 12,000 Korean Americans still reside. Mainly they're older age group, a lot of seniors, because we do have a lot of surrounding Korean American senior apartments. As you may know, Mugung Terrace, Koram Apartments, North Park Village Apartments, and along with others more in Sheridan, Lawrence area. So there's a senior apartment with a lot of Korean Americans still reside there, and they have to depend on public transportation. So they take the buses to commute. That's why you'd be surprised sometimes, Ms. Parr, people in like in surrounding like Sheffield, in Sheridan somewhere, the seniors take the bus, come to Albany Park Library.
Yes,
to
they do.
read and book, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we see that. And then many of them came to get the Korean pharmacy, treatments, acupuncture, herbs. And then now, of course, many of them already has closed, but video shop, renting Korean dramas. Korean seniors will love that. And they drive all the way to Lawrence. We have more than 15 plus video shops. We have more than almost 15, 20 beauty salon in surrounding area. So people do come and, access to the restaurants and all other things. But now, sadly, when you drive around Lawrence Avenue, you don't see much a Korean language business signs. Maybe a few bakeries, pharmacies, and herb stores and so on. Many of them have moved out of suburb area, which we can share that too a little later. But right now, so per se, even though many Korean Korean seniors are residing in Albany Park, Saguenay area, surrounding area, but because of the businesses and not energetically elaborated as what we have been seeing, so now it's a totally different picture. And then the parents with the younger children, they no longer able to send the kids to a surrounding area, so you don't see that all. But you do see any social service agency operation related to seniors, elders. They're very kind of active because of the surrounding Korean American community centers and apartments are there. As you may know, Hanul Alliance, Center for Seniors.
Hana Center?
Hana Center used to be Korean American Community Center. 상록회, Korean American Senior Land, and so on.
Mutual Health.
Mutual Health, the community self-help centers, and so on. So in surrounding, we still have that as well. And then you still see a lot of wholesale businesses. Of course, not only a Wilson and Clark, that's a huge wholesale town, but also in surrounding Albany Park, you still see a nice size of wholesale import trading businesses owned and operated by Koreans, because that is a Korea town. So many business people from out of state, say from Ohio, Indiana, Milwaukee, or further Mississippi and so on, they don't have to have the direction. They say, oh, let me just go to Koreatown in Lawrence Avenue nearby. As long as I get there, I can get my beauty salon, I get my haircut, I can get grocery shopping, I can get video renting, which is not anymore, and then able to do everything else and purchase the business supplies as well. So they seem to do that, and of course nowadays that also has a changes to a more north suburban area. I don't know if you want me to share that, yes or no, or later. Can be.
Okay, yeah. So one of the famous Korean street festival moved from Bryn Mawr Street to the suburb right now. So that shows that how Korean town moves. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure. As you just mentioned about the Korean festival, if we can, it will be nice to share that maybe in next segment.
Yeah, next session. Yeah. But however, let's go to the next session. So thank you for everything that you shared with us today. Could you wrap up today's lecture by talking about the future of the Korean American in Chicago?
Sure. So just very quickly, kind of oversee the Chicago Korean American immigrant community really sacrifice and contribute a lot to our great city. And then when we're looking at it, including like in early 1991, I believe, we had our first Korean parade in so-called Koreatown in Lawrence Avenue. And then in 1995, in May 23rd, one of the largest Korean senior U.S. citizenship celebration was held in Navy Pier downtown. We had like 589 people, seniors, all at once, one time, came into Navy Pier, and we were able to put all our oath, and they became a United States citizens. So that is a great, huge accomplishment as well that none other ethnic community ever done. And then, as you mentioned, 1997, we have K-Fest, Korean Street Festival on that Bryn Mawr Avenue. And we had that more than 20 some odd years. And then we call that memory. We really like to see that back because of the Korean American leadership changes. We were not able to do that as an annually, but we hope to see that again to bring everyone come together, because that will be a great opportunity at one place that during the weekend for people, the community members and non-Koreans, and they all come together, enjoy Korean authentic food, culture, entertainments, various programs and celebrations. So we like to see that. And then 2007, in May, City of Chicago had built a sister city relationship with the Busan city, second largest city in Korea. So we did that, and then hopefully educational wise, civic, business wise, we were able to continuously serve. So overall, we are seeing a great strong growth of various Korean social service professional organizations and entities, the businesses itself, various cultural organizations like Korean American Association, Korean Women's Associations, including and various many civic leadership organizations as well. So we are great to see that. But as you mentioned, what are we seeing in the future? This is my kind of personal perspective. So as no longer that we are seeing a Korean community slowly dying off in Chicago surrounding area. And then even though they have moved to suburban area, and we do continuously having a nice size of Korean American population in Chicago suburban area. For example, probably Glenview. Based on 2000 census, about 1866, grow to about 2240 or so. Northbrook, we had about less than 900 in 2000 census. Now it became almost 1900, 2000 population. Champaign, we have about almost 2,000, but those are our students, so it doesn't count. Schaumburg, we have almost 1,900 Korean population there. Skokie, used to be, we had more than 2,500, but they moved to a different surrounding area. Now we have about 1,770 population. Buffalo Grove, 1,700 Korean population. Naperville, 1,660 population. Vernon Hill, almost 1,400 population, grow from 600. Arlington Heights, 1,100 population, grow from the 900 population. And then like Mount Prospect, Niles, Des Plaines, Long Grove, and so on. So we do see the nice number. But here's my concern and worry. As long as we are not seeing more newly arrival Koreans from Korea, so there will be less of Korean immigrants coming in. And even though they're coming in, they move out to New York, California, nowadays even Dallas, Texas, Georgia, San Francisco, and Virginia, and so on. So coming into Chicago is getting scarcer and scarcer. So when you are seeing the less population immigrating, and because of the many reasons, also the US government visa situation too, they have been very concernably discriminative, and they're not now inviting any immigrants. Now they become, you have to be very highly educated and particular field. You have to get college, university, and up MBA degree per se, in order to immigrate or getting a better work visa and so on. So it's going to be tough for general family immigration status regards. So if we don't see that much, the number's going to be continuously shrinking. And like in Chicago, we are going to see more of this shrinkingness. And then the second and third generation Korean American population, now they became more of a professional, white collar, professional society that they're involving with. So they no longer need to living with their parents, Korean parents, the Korean community. Maybe once in a while, they do come to shop, grocery shop for three largest Korean-owned super grocery stores like Asimart, a Super H Mart, Chicago Food per se, in nearby. They do come, regularly or once in a while. But beside that, if we do not continue build this relationship, it will be much difficult. And then church, like I said, in 70s and so on, early immigrant, when they come, they were able to attend the churches and religious organization and so on. Now, the so-called the second, third generation of Korean Americans, they no longer need to attend our parents' Korean language speaking, even though we do have a English speaking ministry there too, but they no longer need to go there, attending that anymore. So we are seeing that less and less. This is the reason, also another challenge, future challenge of the Korean religious organization, churches and so on. We are going to see a huge downsizing on that, and they have to sell out, closing the churches as well. So along with this line, it will be a great challenge for our generation, Ms. Young Park and myself, that able to hold this continuation of this Korean American community, so-called. But within, say, within 15 years later, when you are passed away, no longer, I don't know, this could be, we are going to see like a more Japanese community that we are seeing instead of us in Chicago's surrounding immigrant community. Even though Japanese community is the fifth largest ethnic population right now, after us, sixth, I'm sorry, Korea is the fifth largest. So that they became melting pot. And then there is no longer a specific community itself sharing the culture and so on. It's a totally different matter. And I think I am concerned the Korean American community in Chicago surrounding, if we are not continue recruiting and we are not able to see a new arrival, we are going to have quite a challenge on our Korean American community in general.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we have to wrap up the program, but I would like to hear more about the Korean American community in Chicago from you. So I hope we can make another chance. So thank you again for being here and then joining us tonight. Thank you again to the CPL Foundation and supporters and the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Committee for all the wonderful work they do year-round. I want to mention the upcoming program, 2021 One Book, One Chicago season does go through the end of the year. So including Thursday, November 18, the Korean Cooking in Chicago with special guest Beverly Kim, a James Beard award-winning chef and the owner of the Parachute restaurant and the Wherewithal, talk about the Korean cooking in Chicago. So you can find all the details at onebookonechicago.org. Please visit there. Thank you again, everyone, for being here and have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. You guys doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.